think we're going to get started. And I wanted to thank the government of Peru for hosting us. Thank you so much. Mil gracias. My name is Carter Roberts. There's a little bit of a ringing. I'm Carter Roberts. I'm the president and CEO of World Wildlife Fund of the United States. And today, this event marks the 25th anniversary of the Tropical Forest Conservation Act, now the Tropical Forest and Coral Conservation Act, which really pioneered debt for nature swaps and was authorized by Congress in 1998. It has gone on to do quite a number of things, but that's what today is really all about. And I'm sure the senator and others will get their licks in on other bills and legislation, but this is all about TFCA, and all the more reason to have this in the Peru Pavilion because of something you'll hear a lot more about. I just wanted to say a few words up front, which is, I'm sure all of you remember Tom Lovejoy, who passed away 2 Christmases ago, who was WWF's first chief scientist and went on to become an indispensable part of the conservation movement. And every single conservation organization claims Tom Lovejoy as their own. But he was ours first. But Tom, incredibly dear friend, who really pioneered the idea of debt for nature swaps back in the day. And WWF, CI, many others went after this mechanism in a big way early on. And now it's expanded to where we're all working together on this really important mechanism. I wanted to just introduce as our first speaker, Senator Brian Schatz, who is a senator from Hawaii, who has been an absolute champion on this mechanism and on many others at the intersection of climate change and nature. And I'll get out of the way and let the senator speak his piece. So good to see him.
Well, it is a real pleasure to be here. Thank you, Carter. Hello, everybody, as we say in Hawaii. Aloha. You're supposed to say aloha back. That's right. Very good. I also want to thank the government of Peru for hosting us. It is a real honor to be here. And I want to thank WWF for convening this important conversation and for your tireless work on this topic over the years. My colleagues and I have been talking a lot here at the COP about the incredible progress that we've made in the United States since passing the Inflation Reduction Act last year. We finally did it. We finally took the biggest climate action in human history. And I think that it has gone even better than we had anticipated. You know, a lot of you understand that when you do climate action, you use independent models to project the participation rates in terms of clean energy, and it is exceeding even the most optimistic expectations. But there is so much more to do. Taking action in just our own communities won't be enough because the climate crisis is a global one. It demands a global response. So we also need to be looking at ways that we can help other countries, particularly ones that don't have the resources that we have to take steps of their own. Some of those ways will be new and innovative. And I know especially policy people like to come up with a new way of doing things. And I think that's great. I've got great policy people. They're always pitching me on new ideas. But we also have an existing mechanism here that works really well. Debt for nature swaps for conservation efforts have proven incredibly effective and need to be scaled globally. The United States has been conducting debt for nature swaps for 25 years since Congress passed the Tropical Forest Conservation Act in 1998. And so far, TFCA funding has been used to enact 22 debt swaps across 14 different countries, helping to conserve essential ecosystems such as tropical forests and coral reefs. All told, TFCA agreements will generate more than $380 million in grants for conservation projects worldwide. The numbers are impressive by any measure, but the impact of these swaps on local communities and wildlife that rely on these ecosystems is immeasurable. The United States does not do this alone. It's also thanks to WWF and others who have helped to expand the impact of these swaps, contributing over $25 million to more than a dozen agreements. It is fitting that we are gathered here in the Peru Pavilion because it was just a few months ago that the United States and Peru signed a $20 million swap. With the help of WWF and other nonprofits, it's the third of its kind between our two countries, which is testament to the success of these swaps and the relationship between our two nations. Crucially, it will help to protect the Peruvian Amazon, which is one of the most biologically diverse places on the planet. To date, TFCA agreements have helped to save tens of millions of acres of tropical forest land in countries across the world, including Botswana, Brazil, the Philippines, Indonesia, and more to come. And you know, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, the mainstream environmental movement discovered this term called environmental justice. And I am glad that they did. And I'm glad that the mainstream environmental movement understood that, at least in the United States of America, it was not diverse economically or geographically or in terms of its ethnic background or in terms of its perspective, and that we needed to understand that pollution disproportionately harms Native people in particular. But there is a tendency to always want to invent a new program to solve the new problem that has been identified. But environmental injustice is as old as time. And we need to understand that we don't need a new program. We need to beef up the ones that work to solve the problems in a proven way. As promising as these results have been so far, it is nowhere near enough. And that goes for debt for nature swaps, but also for the Inflation Reduction Act, right? There's always two ways to look at our climate action. One is that we should be tremendously proud of the progress that we've made in a short period of time. And the other is that it is not nearly enough. And so I am pleased to help you all to commemorate this incredible work that you're all doing. I'm pleased to honor the work of the United States government and the government of Peru. And more importantly, before we got started, I got to meet some of the people who do the work at the Treasury Department and at WWF. And we are already thinking about how to expand the program in terms of its eligibility and in terms of the partners that we can engage with, and most importantly, how much money we bring to the table. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Senator Schatz. It was in 2002 that WWF, along with TNC and CI, signed a groundbreaking agreement to support the government of Peru in creating 11 million hectares of new protected areas at the headwaters of the Amazon. And in some ways, it's fitting that you run the clock forward, and this debt swap in Peru is in some ways a crowning achievement for TFCA, because it circles back on that earlier commitment, and the number of players is greater now. It's WWF and CI and TNC and WCS that have all come together around this effort. For WWF, it is, we know, and Senator Schatz talked about this, that this work happens, and it's not just about the money. It's also about the engagement of civil society, the local mechanisms, the durability, and all of that. And it's bringing the money together with those policies, with the Ministry of Environment, but also the Ministry of Finance. And I've always said in our work that we often talk to one minister, and it's the minister that is most obviously important to us. But in addition to the Minister of Environment, the Minister of Finance is just as critical for a lot of the work that we need to do. And the world is so focused right now on this financial gap that was identified in the Montreal Agreement and is something that is now unleashing all manner of creative, innovative mechanisms. But the granddaddy or the grandmother of them all was TFCA that really pioneered this, this mechanism that we're talking about today. For WWF, this debt swap in Peru accomplishes a lot of different things. It will support the civil society engagement. It will support the conservation of the headwaters of the Amazon. It will also contribute to and support Patrimonio del Perú, which is one of a new series of mechanisms that WWF, along with TNC, and many others are pioneering across the world. And it's called Project Finance for Permanence, where you bring together innovative sources of finance in a single closing with innovative closing conditions that governments enact and implement, that in that same single closing, the money comes together with the policies and enables governments to defend these park systems over time. And it was on my birthday, I think it was 4 years ago, where in the headwaters of the Amazon, that we signed the Patrimonio del Perú agreement. And there was great joy and jubilation at that moment. And but nobody celebrated my birthday. And I came down and everybody was gone. They all went off to celebrate. And I just kind of sat there alone, sad about the whole thing. And then out everybody popped with my birthday cake, with the signed agreement. And every year I keep dreaming of signing similar agreements on my birthday, but it hasn't quite happened. But Patrimonio del Perú is an enormously important mechanism for this government. It will continue to seek other sources of finance. And this TFCA, this debt swap, matters a lot toward that. And that mechanism is now being repeated in Colombia, in Brazil, in Mongolia, in Vietnam, and so many different parts of the world. And what Peru has done is really set the stage for others to follow, and I couldn't be more.
I'd also like to thank the government of Peru for hosting us, as well as WWF for organizing. As Carter mentioned, I'm Adam Wayne Levine with the U.S. Treasury, and maybe just to give a little bit of context on what this program is, can give a brief overview of the U.S. Treasury's role and what this program does. As many of you may already know, but just to catch people up, the TFCCA program is a program by which the US government can redirect certain debt payments from developing countries to meaningful conservation efforts, including tropical forests and coral reef ecosystems. And we're very excited about what we've done with Peru, and we're very much looking forward to the future and what we can do with countries like Indonesia, which we're currently in discussions with. I think it's worth also observing, in terms of the U.S. Treasury's role, the importance of a strong oversight committee and making sure that these programs are healthy and functioning. In particular, as both Carter and Senator Schatz observed, an oversight committee can play a strong role in making sure the funds are dedicated to both meaningful conservation efforts, but also efforts that can improve local livelihoods. Without going into too much, I'll now introduce how we might handle the discussion and what we might have the panelists handle. We'll first have a round of questions for the speakers, and then we'll invite the speakers in the second session to comment on any of the remarks that were made. And finally, with time permitting, we'll turn it over to the audience for hopefully some question and answers. My first question is to the Minister of Peru. As you know, our teams have been working well together and are very excited about what we've been doing. And I think Peru has a strong legacy of leadership in the TFCCA program, with swaps signed in 2002, 2008, and now 2023. My question is, can you describe the importance of this agreement and your hopes for its impacts?
Good afternoon, everyone. For me, it's better if I speak in Spanish. They have to me. Bueno, en primer lugar, quiero agradecer a los organizadores por esta invitación. Este es un evento muy importante porque nos permite visibilizar el potencial que tiene el mecanismo. Este mecanismo de canje de deuda en el financiamiento de la acción climática. También comparto un saludo a las autoridades del gobierno de Estados Unidos y a los representantes de la ONG WWF, agencia USAID, que para nosotros es muy importante, un soporte muy importante en el Perú, y a quienes están presentes en nuestro pabellón, bienvenidos a nuestro pabellón Perú, y a quienes están conectados también virtualmente a este conversatorio. Hace menos de 2 meses hemos completado una experiencia de canje de deuda por naturaleza con el gobierno de Estados Unidos. Reorientó el pago de la deuda externa del gobierno del Perú hacia un fondo para financiar proyectos de conservación para bosques. Este acuerdo reconoció la contribución de $15 millones del gobierno de Estados Unidos y 3 millones de las ONGs, en este caso, que son Conservación Internacional, de Nature Conservancy, de WWF, y que permiten al Perú redireccione dichos recursos hacia la conservación de bosques tropicales en el Perú. Este mecanismo es muy importante para nosotros porque esta donación nos permitirá financiar proyectos de conservación, mantenimiento, restauración de bosques tropicales a través de actividades como establecimiento, restauración, protección y mantenimiento de nuestras áreas naturales protegidas y otras modalidades de conservación, aportando a la meta 30x30 de CUNY-Montreal. Lo segundo es el desarrollo e implementación de sistemas de gestión de recursos naturales, incluyendo prácticas de manejo y control de la erosión de suelos y ecosistemas, así como programas de fortalecimiento de capacidades científicas, técnicas y administrativas de personas y organizaciones involucradas en el esfuerzo de conservación, así como la restauración, protección o uso sostenible de especies de flora y fauna, investigación e identificación de usos de las especies vegetales con fines medicinales en la región amazónica, respetando los conocimientos y prácticas ancestrales de los pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales, así como el desarrollo y apoyo de los medios de vida de las personas que dependen de los bosques tropicales y sus recursos de manera consistente con la conservación de la naturaleza. Esta experiencia nos abre la oportunidad de abordar de manera sinérgica las agendas de conservación de la biodiversidad y cambio climático. Por ejemplo, al conservar las áreas naturales protegidas, estamos también implementando algunas de nuestras medidas de adaptación y mitigación al cambio climático que forman parte de nuestras NDC, nuestra contribución determinada a nivel nacional, a la cual nosotros hemos denominado nuestro desafío climático, como por ejemplo la recuperación de conocimientos y prácticas ancestrales en adaptación y en la gestión efectiva de áreas naturales protegidas del Perú en mitigación. De esta manera, estaremos fortaleciendo la acción climática en el territorio y mejorando la calidad de vida de las poblaciones que viven y dependen de los bosques, como son los pueblos indígenas u originarios, quienes son los más vulnerables ante los impactos del cambio climático. Y dentro de estos vulnerables, las mujeres indígenas siguen siendo las más vulnerables y por ello nuestro enfoque hacia ellos. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you for your leadership. My next question is for Gillian. Gillian, our teams work closely together on many of these efforts, and I'm particularly interested in hearing from you about, given USAID's focus on nature, climate as priorities, how does TFCCA fit into this approach, and what lessons have you learned? As well as how are you thinking about USAID's broader role in catalyzing additional financing for nature and climate?
Well, I first have to say congratulations to Alvina. We have known each other for 30 years or something like that. We both were acknowledged with an award for social entrepreneurship many years ago. And I think it's telling that we both find ourselves in government now. Debt for nature swaps is so important. There were some numbers thrown out there, but I think just digesting them for a minute is worthwhile. In total, there have been 263 million appropriated to support the swaps. We supported 22 debt for nature swaps in 14 countries worldwide. And the Nature Conservancy and the World Wildlife Fund and Conservation International have contributed a further more than 25 million to the investments that we have been able to make by deconcessioning that debt and investing it in these local foundations, which has in turn yielded 380 million to support locally based conservation efforts in both forests and coral reefs. So very, very important opportunity, and I think syncs well with USAID's broader approach, which of course is to focus on advancing development. The countries we're working in are increasingly debt-ridden, and that debt has only continued to mount as we see, of course, the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, which of course we'll see more and more pandemics in the context of the climate crisis, given the vectorial spread of disease, and the climate crisis itself with increasing and really extreme weather events, which place even more burdens on these countries. So we absolutely need to figure out how to navigate the debt crisis. I think the opportunity of the bill is obvious. There are limitations, however, because the Act only certain debt is eligible and only certain countries are eligible for debt forgiveness under the Act. So it needs to be debt prior to 2019 from the US in most cases. And the country needs to meet the democratic standards we would expect. And of course, it has to be a tropical forest or a coral reef that can be preserved. So what that means is we have a dwindling amount of debt in countries that we can match to that debt. So I think it's time to reimagine the bill. I had a chance to mention that and chat with Senator Coons about it on our last panel. And I think one thing we ought to be thinking about, and of course WWF and others alongside the Development Finance Corporation are moving in this direction, thinking about the very large scale of commercial debt on the books. That's increasingly the dominant share of debt that our country partners are facing, and we need to figure out how we can get at a broader range of debt, and frankly, a broader range of nature-based solutions, even beyond tropical forests, would help us expand the eligibility of the already existing debt we have to offer. In terms of the lessons learned, I think that you emphasized in your remarks the importance of really respecting Indigenous communities and women and traditional knowledge and insight. And one of the things that really makes me care about this particular bill is that it has enabled support for these locally based organizations to build the capacity of the NGO sector over time. And in fact, the establishment of these conservation foundations has helped set the stage for kind of best-in-class principles on how these foundations should be established with local governance at the heart of the control and management of those funds. So, I think that's another kind of important lessons learned through the process. Beyond that, I think I'll hold it there because I'm sure you have something to say about commercial debt as well in your role. So I'll stop there.
No, I think there'll be more to come. And so my next question is for you, Greg. As Gillian mentioned, there's obviously a lot happening in this space, and I know IDB has played a role in some of these swaps in Belize and I believe Ecuador. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on the role of IDB in this space and what are the biggest challenges and opportunities you're seeing?
No, thank you so much, and thanks for me to be here to speak about this topic. And really how multilateral finance can complement everything that's being achieved for the past 25 years that we're talking about. The IDB, when we looked at our countries, we saw countries that had increasing debt burdens that were also facing challenges with financing their biodiversity commitments, their climate commitments. And what we ended up doing was looking at something that we actually call a debt for nature conversion, which we've pioneered with the US Development Finance Corporation in many cases. These are structures that are directed to substitute outstanding debt for new debt that's less expensive because we apply a credit enhancement. And that comes from us, that comes from DFC, that can come from conservation organizations as well. This then creates savings that are fully or partially targeted towards conservation activities through conservation trust funds. So we've learned a lot of lessons from what's happened in the past with sovereign debt. We pay a lot of attention to the governance of those trust funds. And I think one of the other interesting things in these projects for us is that they're policy-based instruments. And so if we use a policy-based guarantee or a different policy-based instrument, we have a policy matrix to review with the government of the enabling framework for both debt management, but also on conservation that we want to see achieved before our credit enhancement will go into place. We also spend a lot of time agreeing on conservation commitments that are usually targeted towards the 30 by 30 goals. We've done this so far now in Barbados and in Ecuador. And the results have really been quite substantial. In 2023, the one that we did with the Development Finance Corporation was the largest ever debt for nature conversion, which protected the Hermandad Marine Reserve of Galapagos. Again, different ecosystem as well as we were talking about. The combination of the political risk insurance of DFC, which was $656 million, and an IDB guarantee of $85 million allowed Ecuador to buy back $1.6 billion worth of market debt. And that generated $450 million for conservation. And so that is channeled to a conservation trust fund that is going to be spent over 18 years. And that allows us also to look at the way that those impact are recorded, because we have commitments around fishery regulation, we have commitments around other conservation activities in the Galapagos, and the trust fund can help us very transparently and in a integrity to report not just the spending of the money, but the impact. In Barbados, actually, it was a smaller transaction. It generated $50 million for conservation, but 100% of the savings actually went to conservation in that deal, because in some of the other deals we also have, we free up some space for other government spending. We just this past week signed with other multilateral development banks a joint declaration on credit enhancement for these kinds of deals. And with the Development Finance Corporation, the IDB is going to lead a working group on this topic going forward with other IDBs. We're trying to share what we've learned and to bring that to other actors. We also are working with DFC to figure out ways to make these more efficient, ways to change the financing in such a way that we can do it faster. Our Barbados deal took about a year to put together. Ecuador also took about a year to put together. But these build off of pre-existing work by conservation organizations to figure out what management plans can look like, and very important work with local communities to ensure that local communities have been engaged in these processes from the very beginning, and also are engaged in the governance of the trust funds. And so that's a bit how we're looking at this at the IDB and how we can complement the sovereign debt side with the market debt side.
Thank you. My next question is for Josefina. Josefina, the US government and Treasury have been working very closely with the WWF for the last 25 years. And as Carter mentioned, I believe WWF has been a pioneer in this debt for nature approach since the 1980s. My questions to you are, why has this been a priority for WWF in Peru? And maybe you could speak to the role of civil society and groups like WWF going forward.
Excuse me, thanks, Adam. And I just want to take a moment to take the audience to be here with us today to celebrate this milestone, because we're talking about 25 years of the TFCA, and I think we just need to take a pause and get into this mood of celebration. Torres has been fortunate to partner with the US government in this effort and many others to achieve our conservation mission. And I'm delighted to be here with my fellow panelists and with Minister Ruiz in particular to celebrate this in the Peru Pavilion, because it's a very fitting place for us to have this celebration as Peru is showing incredible leadership to conserve its rich and vibrant biodiversity, culture, and people. And I think this is a great place to have this celebration and this conversation. As my fellow panelists mentioned, and as Carter mentioned at the beginning in his opening remarks, TFCA brings key ingredients that makes it a special instrument for conservation impact. And I wanted to focus on 3 of these ingredients. First of all, WWF cares about TFCA because of the capacity to mobilize finance. And this is important because TFCA isn't about aspirational commitments. It's bringing real financing for conservation. And today the program has unlocked over $380 million for tropical forest mangroves and coral reef conservation. And this is such an important achievement because when we are talking about conservation, it's always challenging to move to large-scale financing opportunities in a chunk that allow us to do planning for sustainability and durable conservation. And based on TSCA, we're starting to see different debt swaps in other places like Ecuador and Greece, and it's we're building on this model. So I think it is very important what TSCA has started and what we're seeing to start to see replicated in other places. So again, it just allows us to think about conservation moving from the tens of millions of dollars to the hundreds of millions of dollars that are going to be liberated and dedicated to conservation, which takes me to my second point, my second ingredient, which is leverage. I think it's very important to recognize that TSCA swaps have been an important tool and effort to bring additional financing for large-scale conservation. We're talking about finance that is liberated, that is additional, and it's suddenly available to plan the conservation actions that a country needed to think in terms of the sustainability pathway. Excuse me. So we were all talking about this year's Peru debt swap agreement, which will be delivering funding to improve effective management of protected areas, but also it will be bolstering Peru's national legacy. Peru's national legacy initiative, or in Spanish, Patrimonio Natural de Perú, which several of us have mentioned, and it's important to highlight this as a huge milestone. So when we talk about bolstering PDP or Patrimonio Natural de Perú, we're talking about finance that is also going to contribute to livelihoods of people, of indigenous peoples and local communities in and around the Peruvian Amazon, as well as, of course, going to be helping us secure and to finance the long-term tropical forest and freshwater ecosystems conservation. So it's an important achievement to mention. And also, of course, to mention that Peru's natural legacy is it's a government-led effort that is going to be committing to conserve 60 million hectares using the project finance for permanence model approach that Carter mentioned at the beginning. And these PFPs are key because it's not about a project or unlocking funding for 2, 3, 5 year period. We're talking about real commitment, political will, and financing for durable conservation finance. And finally, my third point, or my third ingredient that I wanted to highlight is the topic of partnerships, because TFCA has brought together government and civil society organizations such as WWF to work together to execute that swap. And it's important because civil society organizations like WWF have other, not only finance, they don't bring only finance, but they bring local experience, knowledge, relationships, and of course a strong foundation in science, which allows to work together for a successful execution of the debt swap. So I just want to say that this program has spanned 25 years in 14 countries. Again, something to celebrate and that remarkable legacy to be.
Just want to thank all of the panelists for these remarks. We have about 20 minutes left. So I'd first like to invite any of the panelists to comment on any of the remarks by their fellow panelists. And we could then, based on how the conversation goes, transition to Q&A from the audience. So.
I wanted to comment on leverage and this notion of leverage, which is something that I think we have to think a lot about in the public sector right now, given the scope of the gap. We need about 600 times as much climate finance as is currently circulating out and about. And that money is there, but it's not in our coffers, unfortunately, when it comes to governments. Obviously, we've struggled to get to the 100 billion that we committed under the Paris Agreement. It looks like we've finally done so in 22 and 23, but that's a small fraction of what's necessary. So USAID and many of our allies are thinking a lot about how we can use our money in different ways, providing concessional finance, providing first loss guarantees, and creating vehicles that will de-risk the kinds of investments we need in nature-based solutions, and most notably in adaptation, where only approximately 2% of private sector dollars are flowing in that direction. And parenthetically, when it comes to adaptation, I really commend you to a new report that BCG just put out yesterday or the day before on a business case for adaptation as part of our prepare content action for the private sector. In any case, we've got to be thinking much more creatively about how we mobilize private sector engagement. At USAID, we just launched the Green Guarantee Company with 100 million in capital from USAID and the Green Climate Fund and the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority and UK FCDO. And that will catalyze an estimated $1 billion in climate-based investments. It's the first private guarantee company that exists for this kind of capital. I saw in Forbes, Prime Minister Mia Mottley just described another initiative we launched called the Blue-Green Bank of Barbados as a godsend, because it will help set the stage for that critical infrastructural investment that Barbados needs to tackle, increasingly hectic weather conditions on island. So I think this is the direction we need to move in, is figuring out how we shouldn't be displacing private capital, which is why, in general, those mitigation investments in renewable energy, for example, unnecessary to be putting public capital in that direction. We should be looking for that sweet spot where the limited capital we have can really generate a magnitude of return, 10 or 15 or 20x on what we're able to put forward in the public sector. So thanks.
Thank you. Minister.
Gracias, Dina. Luego de escuchar los comentarios, también me gustaría complementar que los cambios de deuda por naturaleza también debería servirnos para cortar las brechas de tecnología en nuestros países, en los países como Perú y países en vía de desarrollo. Por ejemplo, nosotros en Perú hemos desarrollado una web denominada Cucucuy, que es una palabra en náhuatl, una lengua nativa que significa ojos de águila, y la comunidad como celular nos ayuda a monitorear la deforestación. Y muy rápidamente nos pueden dar cuenta de lo que está pasando en su localidad. Seguramente otras más que nos pueden ayudar, y estos fondos de cambio de deuda por naturaleza pueden ayudarnos. Aprovecho también para comentar que juntamente con el Ministerio de Economía y Finanzas estamos terminando de elaborar nuestra estrategia de financiamiento climático. Y de hecho los instrumentos de cambio de deuda por naturaleza nos han retroalimentado, nos han servido en el proceso de construcción de nuestra Estrategia Nacional de Financiamiento Climático. Y quiero compartir con ustedes que en la COP28 Perú ha traído una propuesta que ahora también ya está respaldada por el Foro de Ministros de Ambiente de América Latina y el Caribe, y la creación de un fondo climático para mujeres indígenas. En realidad, el cambio climático afecta de manera diferenciada a las mujeres, y si las mujeres son rurales es más, pero si son nativas es mucho mayor aún. Entonces estamos buscando que este fondo permita realmente generar capacidades en adaptación y mitigación a más de 3 millones de mujeres indígenas que hay alrededor del mundo. Y creemos que estos fondos pueden sumarse también a ese proceso y ayúdennos a desarrollar también eso, ¿no? Y finalmente, quiero señalar en realidad que estos fondos de cambio por naturaleza nos ayuda muchísimo a seguir conservando nuestros bosques, a poner en valor la biodiversidad, pero sobre todo a pensar que no podemos conservar o no podemos hablar de desarrollo sostenible si no generamos también los recursos para que estas comunidades tengan vida digna y acortemos también las brechas de acceso a servicios básicos. Por ejemplo, cuando pensamos en nuestra Amazonía, es donde las brechas son mayores en educación, en salud, en conectividad, en acceso a energía. Entonces, creemos que también debemos atender esto para garantizar que nuestra población pues, no siga migrando o no sea atacada por actividades ilegales, ¿no? Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Minister.
I just wanted to comment on what you just said, Minister, because I think it's important to acknowledge the important opening the door to have a multi-sector dialogue when we talk about this one, because we get the ministers of finance at the table with the possibility to restructure the way our countries develop. And countries like Peru or my home country, Mexico, where lots of the emissions come from the land sector, which is so intertwined, obviously, and related to nature, it's going to be super important that the right investments and the right financial planning is in place to meet our country's commitments, not only for climate change, but for nature, right? And it's kind of like becoming, lots of triple win if we think about investing in nature as a way to deliver on our climate goals and our nature goals, but also the sustainable development goals. And that's very important element of bringing that finance at scale that allows us to do that longer planning.
Great.
I want to make 3 quick points based on what we were just talking about. But the one that you were just making in terms of having an honest broker, basically. On the IDB side, we're working on the financing side, but we're also working because our clients are governments, and we're working with the Ministry of Finance. We're working with the Ministry of Environment. We're working with the social ministries as well. So being able to try to bring them together with the conservation community to set these conservation commitments that will be aligned to national targets, NDCs, biodiversity strategies, adaptation strategies, is quite important to us. In Barbados, ultimately that resulted in Barbados setting a target of protecting 30% of the marine space, and that's what's funded through this area, through this work. But the other really important thing is the way that we structure ours is that there is a financial penalty if those commitments are not met. And so you're taking environmental commitments and turning them into financial commitments, which really gets onto the radar of the finance industry. And so they know that they need to keep both an eye on making sure that those activities are funded, that they're done well. And so I think that's been an interesting role for us to be. Second, I think Carter mentioned the PFPs and all of the other kind of programs that are out there that are setting national goals and kind of country packages here too. Again, aligning the conservation commitments with the goals of these kinds of transactions with these broader programs that are already setting national scale goals, I think is a really of this conversation that we're having. And I would say just the third point that I wanted to make in terms of challenges, because you asked us about challenges. That work of getting the ministries to agree to sit down and also several environmental authorities to agree on conservation practices that are very challenging and requires economic valuations of nature and the impacts of sectors, how this is going to impact people around. But then there's also a challenge in the market for rating agencies. The rating agencies can look at these kinds of commercial deals that we're doing. These are deals that are being done to fund conservation, not necessarily because of stress. And so the way that the rating agencies are looking at these transactions is we all are.
Thank you. I think we have about 10 minutes left, so I invite the audience to please signal to someone with a microphone if you have a question, and we can invite the panelists to respond.
Thank you so much for letting me have a role and from the UN Economic Commission for Africa. And my question is about how do you see there's a way to enhance the confidence and the interest of being creditors in those works, especially the type of commercial credit? Thank you.
Signal if you'd like to respond.
I can take that quickly. I would say there's two things. We are seeing a lot of demand. So I think that the model is replicating that we've seen in Africa, that one recently happened with Tanzania and other actors. But I think the integrity and of the monitoring and the ambition of the commitment are what are most important in order to drive more interest in this. Because if we can't, with integrity, report on impacts, and if the commitments are not ambitious enough, I think that then investors are less interested in this kind of structure.
Yep. Carter. This is, I think, a great panel and a really important discussion. These debt restructurings, debt swaps, and all the rest is a huge source of money. You put your finger on this issue of how do you sync those up with these other initiatives in the same country, because the governance can be different, where you have parallel governance structures, the metrics can be different, and then it creates, it has the potential to create great confusion, and so I think it is one of the most important things we have to do is to find a way to proactively sync those up, because I'm in the middle of a couple of things, trying to retroactively do it, and it's brutally hard. So I think that discussion is what is, in country packages, it's a whole other level of that. But how do we set the table to come up with some kind of framework agreement that describes how all these things fit together in the end state, and then design each one so that they snap fit from the get-go. And I think that discussion that you guys are having, I'd love to hear more about how you think about how to proactively design them so they snap fit. Because I think that's one of the most important things we have to do.
Minister.
En nuestro caso, por ejemplo, ha sido muy importante definir anticipadamente a la firma dónde se gastarían estos recursos. Y eso lo conversamos con el Servicio Nacional de Áreas Naturales Protegidas, porque decidimos como gobierno que este dinero debería ir a fortalecer la conservación, pero como nosotros hablamos de conservación, no es la conservación pura, sino conservar con la población ahí adentro, cómo realmente nos incorporamos a ellos. Y por eso parte de los recursos también está yendo al desarrollo de emprendimientos de eco y bionegocios, porque es lo que la población también señala que requiere para hacer un uso sostenible de los recursos del bosque. Para nosotros la experiencia de desarrollar anticipadamente dónde gastaríamos, y de hecho tenemos un comité de gobernanza donde está a nivel del decreto supremo, incluso hemos definido quiénes participarían, que en este caso nuestro ministerio, pero lo bueno es que vamos de la mano con representantes de USAID, pero también de las ONGs, ¿no? Y escuchando siempre a la comunidad, porque creo que cuando los involucramos, ya de hecho estamos apostando porque los proyectos sean exitosos en la inversión. Y así también no se cruza efectivamente porque los recursos son escasos y más que competir lo que tenemos que hacer es cómo se complementan los recursos para realmente garantizar que estamos hablando de desarrollo sostenible y de conservación de nuestros bosques.
Thank you. Really quickly, we're thinking about the exact same things. I'll just talk about this bilaterally sometime. I've been saying we can either grow a bush or we can grow a tree. Right now, I'm worried we're growing a bush because we have taxonomies in certain countries, ministries of finance going in one direction. We have debt for nature conversions going in another direction. We have indicators of PFPs, we have biodiversity credits, we have biodiversity asset classes, we have scientific organizations, we have MDBs. Right now, everybody's growing out sideways. If we align ourselves, we can grow tall, we can grow together into a tree. This is something I think that we should play a role in trying to get everybody sitting at the same table and saying, what are you already doing? How are you doing these KPIs? And how can we come together to harmonize around this framework? Maybe it's a Latin American framework. We get involved. This is like I'm bringing to our senior management after this talk. This is about the fourth conversation I've had where it's been very clear that this is to be here.
We have only a couple minutes left, so I mean, I'd like to chime in on your question as well. This has obviously been a very active conversation. I think one of the things the broader U.S. government, but in particularly the U.S. Treasury, has taken an interest in is country platforms. To your point on bushes that are going sideways, but trees that can grow together. I think there have been some fascinating discussions here and some thinking about how you can coordinate that activity. I'd love to ask the audience for another question, but I think we're tapped out for time, and I know many of us are running to other panels. So maybe I'll just conclude with a few takeaways that I've heard from us. I think the first thing that I'm hearing is we have a tremendous program with TFCCA, and I think many of us have been involved with that, and I think we should celebrate that. I think the second thing that I'm also hearing is that governance, oversight, goal setting is a very important part of thinking through what these programs look like. And a third area of consensus that I'm hearing is also involving the local community and people in these decisions is critically important. And in thinking about the outcomes that we're striving to achieve, improving local livelihoods, I think it's critically important to thinking about what we do in this space. And I think a fourth and final thing that we're hearing is the need for new tools in this space. As many of us mentioned, we have a tremendous program with TFCCA, but based on the current design, there are some limitations with what we can do next. And so I think having a rich discussion with this group would be very appropriate in terms of thinking about what the future is. Thank you again to the panelists. Thank you to the government of Peru, and thank you to WWF.